everybody, good afternoon, and welcome to the Living Coast Discovery Center's Facebook Live Compost Workshop Series 2. My name is Catherine. I'm the Facilities and Sustainability Manager here at the Living Coast Discovery Center. We are a nonprofit zoo and aquarium located in Chula Vista, and our focus is on local native species of wildlife here. I'm sure you've seen a lot of different content on our page this past week, meeting some of our animal ambassadors. But just continue to join us on Facebook around 11 a.m. During the week to see more of our animals here. I'm here in the compost garden. It was sprinkling actually about 15 minutes ago. It started to clear up so I can work out here today. We have gotten a lot of rain here at the Living Coast. I'm sure you have too at home. So we'll see a lot more plants blooming in the next few days here. Today's focus of our composting workshop is for those who don't have the space to compost in a backyard setting. Maybe you don't have open areas of dirt, or you have a lot of concrete. Maybe you live in an apartment and you don't have a backyard, but you might have a porch or balcony that you can put a compost bin like a tumbler on, or even compost with worms. So those are some things that we're going to go over today in our workshop. And we're also going to take a look at the bin that I started last week for you, and we'll see what temperature it's at in this past week. And I'm going to actually add a few more layers to that bin, and we'll see what it looks like next week. So if you're just tuning in, we're here for week 2 of our composting workshop series. My name is Catherine, and we're going to go ahead and get started. So just a quick review of what we did, of what we learned last week. What is composting, right? Composting is nature's way of recycling organic material. So it can be seen as a decomposition process that takes organics like your food waste and your plant material and other paper material as well. Organisms, bacteria, fungi, insects, stuff like that will break down the organic material and turn it into rich soil amendment. So we talked about the importance of composting last week was to reduce the amount of waste we're sending to our landfills, right? Because when organic material gets buried by other trash, the material is broken down through an anaerobic process and releases methane gas into the atmosphere. So it's very important that we reduce what we send to the landfill so we can expand the life of that landfill, so we don't have to build a new one or ship our trash somewhere further and add costs. And in turn, we're creating this nice rich soil amendment to add in organic matter back into the soil. So another great reason why it's important to compost is what I was just saying, is our soil can lack a lot of organic material, and when that happens, you'll notice your plants might not be thriving as much. They might be inundated with pests and disease a lot more, and adding that compost in will give your plants all the necessary nutrients that they need to grow. I like to think of it as the immune system for our plants. That's what our soil is. So like we as humans, we take vitamins, we take supplements, we eat our healthy foods and get our exercise so that when we do get sick, we can fight off that disease faster. And so the same thing goes for our plants, right? We need to have a nice healthy soil for the plants to thrive, and often when you have a strong plant, pests will go for something else because they need to hone in on a weaker plant. Alright, so if you remember some of the ingredients of the compost pile, which were our greens, browns, and blues, right? Remember, the greens were the rich in nitrogen content material. So remember, if you place these items in a trash bag and you left it out in the sun for a few days and you came back to that bag, the material inside that bag is starting to get wet, breaking down, a little mushy maybe, and you might notice some flies and some bad odors. So that is a green or nitrogen-rich material. So do you remember what those were? Some fruits, vegetables, coffee grounds, tea leaves, grains. So if you have leftover pasta or rice, tortillas, bread, bagel, you burnt your toast in the morning, you can put that in your compost pile. Grass clippings, leaves, any trimmings from your garden. I would recommend limiting the amount of weeds and disease plants you put in there, of course. And then also limiting the amount of meat and dairy products. Now, the other part of our compost pile, the browns or rich in carbon material, are things like shredded paper, dried leaves, dried grass, twigs, branches, stuff like that, straw, egg cartons, dryer lint, napkins. All those materials can be put together in the compost pile. And then of course lastly are our blues, which is just air and water. Air is necessary for our aerobic bacteria to get active and break down the material. And then we want our moisture content to be almost like a wrung out sponge. So we don't want it to be overly wet where we're dripping water, but we don't want to be too dry where the material is not staying in a clump. So that's just a quick overview of what we went over last week, our greens, browns, and blues of our compost pile. So I'm going to take you over now to our tumbler area. I have a few different sizes. I have a large one. This is an industrial sized one. It comes with a crank handle there. Material inside here is starting to dry out. I haven't added much material in here for quite some time. We actually sifted about half of this bin last month with my interns, and we're kind of just letting it dry out so that it's easier to sift a little better. Over here I have the medium-sized tumbler and a small-sized tumbler. So we have just single bin tumblers here, but there's definitely bins that are come in dual settings so that you can have two piles going at a time. But let's go ahead and take a look at what we've got going in here. So this one looks a lot more wet than the other bin I showed you. I'm going to reach in here, see what I got going on. There's not really any smell coming from this bin, but you can see eggshells in here. I see some earwigs and ants, some beetles crawling around. And what is this? Oh, this is a corn husk. It's starting to break down. I can easily break it apart now. Alright, so as you can see, what is the main difference between our tumblers and say our soil saver bins that we can use in a backyard, right? Big difference is one sits on the ground and one does not. So you can compost virtually anywhere with these types of composting bins. You can put it in your parking lot for your business, on a rooftop, on your porch, balcony, virtually anywhere. And you'll use the same ingredients, the greens, the browns. You'll dampen your browns to start off with, mix them together, and over time they'll break down into this material. Now, some differences though between the tumblers and the bins that sit on the ground could be that the material breaks down at a little bit of a slower rate in these bins. So on average, with the soil saver bins like this, when I have a full pile and I'm turning it, I can have some siftable product in about 2 to 3 months tops. Enough that I can fill a 5-gallon bucket with. So 2 to 3 months with that. With here, it's going to take me on average 4 to 6 months to have a nice 5-gallon bucket of compost. And the major difference, right, is because it's off the ground, it has limited space for water to escape. So if you can, I can pull you here, sorry, I'm one-handed. The bottom of this bin, there's a hole for water to escape. This one has a few holes on the side, and the big tumbler does as well. but sometimes you can get an excess amount of moisture in the bins. So it's important to add extra browns, right? The dry material to kind of help soak up the excess water. And then another factor, right, with not sitting on the ground is, where do the FBI come from, right? Where do the fungus, the bacteria, and the insects come from? Well, you can leave your bin open like this for a couple days, allow some bugs to make their way in. But all you have to do when you're starting your bin is take a handful of dirt from your yard or somewhere nearby and throw it in there, and the organisms from that dirt will make their way in there, start multiplying and breaking down your food material. Okay, let me just check if there's any questions so far. All right, so I have a few buckets of waste that I'm going to add in today to these bins, and then I'm going to turn it. So I'm going to put you guys down so you can kind of see the whole turning method, and then we'll check back in. So let me go ahead and switch scenes here. And if you're just tuning in, my name is Catherine, Facilities and Sustainability Manager at Living Coast. We're about to add some material to our tumblers today. Remember, these are great if you don't have a backyard and you have space on a balcony or concrete area, you can still compost. All right? So I'm going to add in about 2 buckets of green. Some lettuce. And today's brown material is going to be a little bit of shredded paper from the office. Alright. Close my bin, latch it, and now comes the hardest part. When the bin gets kind of full like it is now, the bin gets very heavy, so it's going to take me 2 hands to turn this tumbler. Let's go ahead. That was a little heavier than I thought. So let's see what it looks like now. Okay, the material's kind of been mixed together. Alright, so you want to turn these tumblers every couple days. Give it a few rotations, 3 to 5. I see a sow bug right there. 3 to 5 rotations every few days or every time you add. Remember, because it's not sitting on the ground, we need to provide more oxygen for the FBI. Alright, so these are our tumblers, the methods that you can do in your balcony. And now we're going to move over to our worm bin. Alright, so this is a type of composting called vermicompost, which is composting with worms. Okay? So we use California red wigglers to break down organic material. And let's see if we can find them in here. Aha! Found a few. So these California red wigglers eat about 50% of their body weight every day. And they can even ingest their castings up to 2 to 3 times before it becomes toxic to them. Their castings is a fancy word for poop, this worm poop. So all this brown material you see in here is not dirt that I added in, it is worm castings. So if you were to go to the store and buy this material, it is kind of pricey for a bag. See them about 30 bucks for about a gallon. And why it's so pricey is because this material is very high in nitrogen. So nitrogen is an essential nutrient that plants need to grow. So tomatoes, for instance, like a lot of nitrogen. So these red wigglers break down things like watermelon, apple cores. I put in avocados sometimes. They don't like as much citrus, so I only put some oranges and stuff like that every once in a while. That's not their favorite food. I'll put in coffee grounds occasionally to help with their digestive tracts as a form of grit, so they can ingest that and help break down the food waste in their stomachs. But the worms don't have teeth, so they rely on the FBI, the other FBI members, right? The fungus and the bacteria, to help soften the food for them, kind of prepare it for them, and then they're able to slurp up the food and ingest it. Now, these worms breathe through their skin, and they secrete a mucus, so it's important to keep your worm bins in a dark, cool place. So if you do have an outdoor worm bin, make sure you find a space that has a lot of shade. They thrive in an environment from about 65 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And what I was saying earlier about ingesting their castings a few times or eating their poop means that if you forgot to feed your worms for a week or two and you came back to your bin, the worms will probably be thriving. So I'm keeping their food waste and castings covered with paper so I don't get a lot of flies. Those are red wigglers. So I'm going to demonstrate how to make a bin of your own at home with some of our materials here. So let me just check though if we have any questions really quickly. I see a question here. Are the worm compost and the bin compost two different methods? And the answer is yes. Okay? The reason for that is with the other methods, the tumbler method or the bin that sits on the ground, you notice I talked about adding oxygen or turning your piles. With a worm bin, you don't want to do that. Like I was saying earlier, they like a cool environment, 65 to 80 degrees. So if you're turning your worm bin and mixing up the ingredients and the bacteria start to get active and release heat, then you can end up killing some of your worms. So your worm bin is a cool composting method. You want to keep the worms nice and happy in that environment. And with that cooler composting method though, that means that sometimes seeds don't break down from like your tomatoes or other vegetables. Seeds break down at about 130 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you're worried about applying compost and having new plants grow, make sure you're doing a very hot compost method, which would be like the tumblers or the bins that I made last week. Hope that answered your question. Let me see if there's anything else. Oh yes, Christina, the worm bin does not need to be turned. You're really going to leave the bin alone. The only time you're really going to get in there is when you're going to feed your worms. Okay? You'll move the paper aside, add in your food waste, cover it up. Okay? I don't add any browns really other than the paper to act as a way to keep the food covered. You could add leaves if you'd like, but we're not adding in grass clippings and twigs and stuff like that and turning my bin. I'm just going to leave it as is. So if you want to make your own worm bin at home, okay, you can take whatever you have lying around the house, or you can order material online. Let me see. I can turn this. But here I just have a few storage containers that stack. You can use buckets, whatever you have. The bottom bin has no holes in it, So if there's any leachate or liquid from your worm bin, because sometimes if you overfeed your worms and there's excess liquid, it'll fall through, and you can catch it here on the bottom. Your top bin should have holes in it though, for aeration and space for, liquid to escape. So I've drilled some holes here on the bottom and up here along the sides. Okay, and what's nice is they stack just like this. Okay, and the hole size I used, they vary, but I've used, let's see, 1/8, 3/16, and quarter drill bit size. And then you also want to make sure you have a lid, of course, and you want to drill some air holes on that as well. So I just need to add a few more to this bin. Okay. Remember, if you have never worked with a drill before or you're a kid, make sure you ask your parents to help you with drilling your holes. Oh, and I'm having a little technical difficulty here. Try one more time. There we go. Okay. So once you have all your holes in your bin, you're going to want to add some bedding. Right? We're going to do shredded paper today. I'm going to add that in here. Alright. And we actually want to make sure that this bedding is wet, dampened. Not too wet, but just a little moist. So I'm going to give it a few sprays. Now, if you're wondering where can I get these red wiggler worms, I get mine at City Farmers Nursery. I'm not sure if they're open right now, but of course we should be staying home, so the best place is online. You can definitely get these red wigglers shipped to you. So once I have it dampened, I am going to take some of my red wigglers that I took from the other bin to start my new bin. Here they are, my red wiggler friends. I'm going to add them in here. I'll show you a close-up of what the bin looks like when I'm done. Add them to their new home. And I'm going to add a little bit of food material for them, some lettuce and apples. Okay. So let's see if I can get a close-up. There's our worms in their bin, and then I'm actually going to move the bedding over. So now it's covered, and I'm going to wet it a little bit more. And that's it. Cover it up, and then I'm actually going to place this in my office and keep it in my office space. So you can definitely have this bin in your kitchen underneath your sink. You can have it on your balcony in the shade, but there's many places that you can have your worm bin. It doesn't have much odor. As long as you're keeping your food covered and not overfeeding your worms, you won't have any issues with smells. I've never come in contact with that issue. If I ever do have a weird smell, I'll simply just add a little more shredded paper or not feed them for a week or two just to allow them to get through the material. So remember though, with your worms, you don't want to overfeed them. So if you're wondering, well, I produce a lot of fruit and veggie waste and I only have a worm bin, what can I do? Well, you can freeze your scraps so that they stay frozen and not stinky, and then add them to your pile later. Now the last thing I want to show you before I leave for today is our bin that we started last week. Off camera I am going to add more layers. but for the sake of time, we're just going to take a quick look. I added a little more shredded paper a couple days ago because it's been raining a lot, so I wanted the excess moisture to get soaked up. But look at that, we are at about 100 degrees. And it was 100 degrees actually the day after we made this pile. So Monday, this past week, I checked, the pile reached 100. If I were to come in here, the material doesn't look so finished like the tumbler. The material, I can still tell, I can see the leaves and the twigs that I put in, as well as the coffee grounds and spent grain. I do notice though there are a lot of ants in this pile. Ants are necessary for composting, but when you have an excess amount of ants, some reasons could be that your pile was too dry. So I'm going to add more water to this pile when I add my new ingredients, and we'll check in next week and see if our ants have gone down. So I'm going to be signing off now. Thank you so much for joining me for our Compost Workshop Series 2 with our focus on apartment composting or composting without a backyard. So we went over our tumblers today, our worm bin, we'll check it out next week. And at the end of this video, I'll check through the comments and I'll answer some questions if I didn't get to it. Thanks again for joining me, Catherine at the Living Coast Discovery Center. We'll see you next week. Happy Easter. Bye-bye.